The version 2 release of the Pro Modules plugin for the Uncanny LearnDash Toolkit introduces a new module to import users from a CSV file directly into LearnDash groups and courses. It's one of the biggest updates we've done, and the plugin is really complex in terms of how it validates users and gets them into the appropriate groups. It also does it cleanly. If you've imported users into LearnDash in the past, specifically into groups, for example, there's a really high risk, even if you weren't aware of it, that users could be added to groups without you knowing it. What happens there is if you're just importing to user meta and setting the group there, there's a risk that when profile pages get updated from the admin page, that other groups could be saved because of the way it adds data to the profile page. Ours is very careful in how it handles that data, and it also does a lot of validation. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly how the plugin works. So the steps that you need to go through, how to set up your CSV file, and how to perform the import so you can make sure that users do get imported and that they're added to the correct groups and courses. So to get started, I've gone in as an administrator and I'm under Users and Import LearnDash Users. And of course, to use this, you would have to go into the toolkit settings and make sure this module is enabled. Once you've done that and you've gone to this page, it is a good idea to take a look at the steps and what's required, as well as take a look at the knowledge base first on the Uncanny Owl website. So I'm going to go through some of the steps here. The first one is to review options on the Options tab. Then we take a look at the email settings because we can trigger emails when users are updated or when they're created in WordPress. Once you've got those set up, you can go ahead and create your CSV file. There is a sample available here, and I'm going to be showing a version of that as I go through the upload. Just make sure that you have columns that follow the standards here. So the columns are defined here that you can use. You can also add any meta you want to the user profile, but there are some key fields that are required here, as well as some optional ones that you probably do want to populate. In some cases, if you don't want to populate them, like if you leave LearnDash courses out and LearnDash groups out, that I'll talk about a bit more, but what can happen is if you leave the columns out entirely, it doesn't make any assignments to them, and you can use this plugin or this module to upload regular users into WordPress without doing anything that's LearnDash related. You can also use it to update user profiles. So if those columns are omitted, you don't have to worry about any effect on LearnDash courses or groups. You can also leave cells in those columns blank if you include them. And then what we can do is we can make sure that everyone that's being uploaded is assigned to a course and or a group based on what you define in the Options tab. Anyway, we'll talk a bit more about that. And then, once you've got the file set up, you can go ahead and import the users. So everything is done through the tabs here, and you don't necessarily need to go through the Options and Email Settings tabs every time you're doing an upload, but I want to walk through them, and it's important that you do look at them the first time you're performing an upload. So the first Options tab and what's in here, the first selection here is what to do with imported users that already exist in the system. You can either update them or you can ignore them. So update might be if there's a matching username in the system, but maybe the first name, last name, profile data, courses are different. Should it update that user with the new information, or should ignore that if it finds a duplicate? So that selection can be made there. The next is user roles. And it is best practice, we find, if it's possible to only have one role per user. So in terms of the upload, we've made it so from the user interface, you can only select one role. And this would be if you're not defining a role in the CSV file. If the column's not included in the CSV file, then it would default to subscriber. You can select other roles here. We do recommend that you use the upload tool primarily for learners. It's a little safer that way. There tend to be extra actions that need to be required if the user is an administrator or a group leader. So it's generally safer to do those manually and individually. But if you are uploading as a group, it's a great tool for adding a lot of learners in bulk, especially if you're adding them to common groups and courses. So further down here, you can see we have a list of all the courses in the system, the LearnDash courses, and a list of all the LearnDash groups that are in the system. So what you can do here, you can define the column for LearnDash courses and groups and just leave the entries blank. And if they're blank, and I'll show you what I mean by this. So if we look at this example here, I've got an example with some invalid data and some valid data. If I were to include this column, but leave this cell blank for this user, so I completely delete that, then we know from including the column heading that we do want to assign courses to users in the upload file. And if that happens where this cell is blank and the column exists, they will be added to the courses defined here. And it's the same thing with LearnDash groups. So if I delete it here, nothing exists, then it's going to override and add those users with the blank value in the column to the groups that are defined here, and it can be one or more. So if there's variation, you can absolutely use it in the CSV file. So you can have, in this example, if these were valid IDs for the LearnDash groups, then you would put, it would add this user to 3 of them. And just to recap, in case you're not familiar with getting the IDs, let me just go to the groups page really quickly. And in here, you can see we've got a couple of groups added. You can't see it. You can't see my address bar right now. Let me just paste what is there, though. So in the address bar, I see this right now. And if you hover over the edit button in the list of groups, you'll actually see the post ID as well. So this is the ID. So if I wanted to get somebody into group imported, then I would go over here and I would say, okay, for this group, I need to get this user into group 276. So I would put, let's use 276 down here. So that is a valid LearnDash group. Okay, so going back then to this can be saved then. This can then serve as defaults anytime you're doing an upload of users. And once that's done, we can go to the email settings page. Actually, I just want to check my settings there. I want to make sure they're valid. This is not. Make sure that this all looks okay. And the rest does, so I'll click Save. It'll take me back up and confirm that it was saved. Next, under Email Options, what we can do is send emails to users when they get created and or when they're updated. So there's one section up here for new users when they're added to the system, and another section down here for updated users. Make sure you have this checkbox set before, or that it's set correctly before you engage in the import. Because once you do the import, you can't trigger emails afterwards if you haven't enabled them. So it's really important that you get the setting right if you want to send emails. So you can turn emails on here. There are a lot of variables that you can include depending on what you need to do. And then down here you can also send test emails. And just a heads up on the emails as they're sent. So these are notifications from the system. If you are using some other tool to wrap your email messages like WP Better Emails or something like that, it will wrap these emails in that as well. And another consideration when you're sending emails, we do have limits and we do also have best practices around how many users to upload. So user uploads can be slow because we're doing a lot of updates, we're doing a lot of lookups. It takes some time. It takes a bit longer for sure compared to other user import tools because of the validation that it does and how it adds the information. So because of that, we do recommend that you not put too many users into your import files. Do batches of even a couple hundred is already pushing things. We definitely don't allow more than 1,000. That also, like besides the processing time and what that's going to do to the system, we do also suggest that if you're processing large batches of users by import, that you do use a transactional email system. If you rely on WordPress and the host to send emails, there's a risk they could be throttled or not sent if it's too many at once. WordPress hosts are generally not able to support large volumes of email. So if you're able to, and if you do have that requirement that you need to send a large batch of emails, definitely use a tool for transactional email like SendGrid or Mandrill or SparkPost, or a similar service to one of those to make sure that emails are delivered, they're not throttled, you can check deliverability. Just a best practice to make sure these emails go through, because if it is somebody's notification that they now have access to the site and it includes their password, you definitely want to make sure they get that email. And it is risky if you're putting through a lot at once and don't have a third-party service to rely on. So just a consideration, especially if you're processing large numbers of users in your upload files. Anyway, so here's the text down here for the upload email, or the update email, very similar to the new user email. So once all of that's been set, you can go to the Import Users tab. And what this does is it reminds you first exactly what's going to happen, what the defaults are, and what the behaviors are for the import. So this is just recapping what's on the other tab, just to make sure you understand exactly what's going to happen. So first it's telling you for anyone that does not have a valid course ID defined, where the column exists, it's going to add them to these courses. So in this case, this is not one we actually selected. If I go back to the Options tab, sample course was not selected. The reason for that, so this shows closed courses, and open courses of course certainly are available to everyone by default. So you don't have to specify that someone needs to be enrolled in an open course, because they would already get access to it and essentially be enrolled into it. So because it's open, we just have this advisory here to make sure you're aware that people are going to get access to this course because it's open. This is the closed course that we chose, selected for that as the default. Down here, this is again users that don't have a valid group ID, or it's blank, then they would be added to that group. And the default role, this is the default role, and then it's just confirming the email settings down here. So I am going to quickly save this file with the changes that I made. There are some errors in this file, and that's intentional because I want to show you what happens when there are errors and what's going to happen there. So down here, I'm going to initiate the upload first. And it's not actually processed at this point. So you can see when I click that, it does validation first. So it's going to tell me how many users are in the CSV file, how many are going to be created. Now, so far there are 10 users, but there are a couple of issues. So the first, this is the only new user. The rest already exist in the system, and this email address is invalid. So this one's invalid, and let's take a look then. So we've got new users that will be created. There's 1. Existing users that will be updated. There's 8. So these ones here. And then users with issues, essentially, here, the 1. So you can see this is not a valid email address. So there's a check for that. And then users with invalid course IDs. So let's take a look. These are the course IDs, and you can see there are 9 here. And these IDs, these are post IDs in WordPress, but they're not LearnDash courses. So that's why it's saying there are users with invalid courses. And then with invalid group IDs, there are 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's where those are coming from. These ones are set properly. This is a valid group. This is a valid group. This is blank. So this user then would be assigned to the group that's the default as part of the import. And then this one is also the valid group that we just looked at a minute ago. So you can see it as a mix. Like, this is just representative to give you an idea of what's possible, but generally speaking, it's going to be a lot easier if you structure your files all in the same way. So especially for novices and to keep things simple, kind of recommend that you include these columns but leave them blank, and then you can just choose your options here and just do it for everyone in the same file. It's going to make things a lot easier and easier to trace. So I'm going to keep this messy and confusing for my upload so you can see the errors and what happens. But we can see essentially that one user is going to get ignored. These users will be updated, and the update will be anything that's different. So in this case, I know the passwords are different, but the rest is all the same. And all right, everything else looks good. So you can see here it also lists what rows there are issues on. So 3 through 11, 3 through 11 have issues with courses. And then here we've got the mix that it knows already that there are invalid groups in there. So that's why it's showing that. All right, so last step is to actually perform the import. So I'm going to click on that, and before I do that, it's going to remind you again one time. There's no going back at this point. So once you do start this, you cannot cancel it. You should not cancel it, and you should stay on the import screen so you can see what's going to happen. So I'm going to click on I'm ready to import, and we're going to see what happens here. So it's going to show the progress. There we go. So it's going to show the progress. This was a pretty quick one because it was only the 10 users. So we've got those users that were updated. 2 rows were ignored. What was the problem here? So that username already exists. That's 3. Right, that was the problem there. So that wasn't actually going to send because that user already exists, and that's a problem. I should have used a different user. And then the other ones are actually not valid email addresses, and they would bounce. Right. So anyway, that's what happened there. We had some existing users that got updated. I'm just going to change this again. I shouldn't have used an example where that user already exists. So I'm going to change this to that. And let's change this to screencast. I'm just going to use that without that. And let's change that to my name, just so we can see an example with an email going out, user that doesn't exist, that is brand new, and do some validation on that. So I'm going to make this a valid LearnDash group, and then we can check on the user afterward as well. So let's go ahead and save this one again. So I'm going to use save, and I'm going to save over top of that again. And let's go ahead and go back here and start all over again. Actually, for that user, let's leave them both blank so that it will use the defaults. And we'll save that. And go ahead and upload this revised file. All right, so still lots of errors, of course. We expected that. It's really only the one row that we're looking at. And we're going to go ahead and say I'm ready to import. So it's going to go through that process again. All right, and that time we did have an email sent because it is a new user, and we are sending it to the new user. And everything else is good. So we've got the email, and I can see that in the background I did receive the email, which is great. So now that that's done, let's take a look at what actually happened. So let's take a look at all users. And the one I just set up was, let's take a look again. It was our more screencast. And that was a subscriber. So I'm just going to skip ahead. Let's look. So we can take a look for this user. There we go. So let's make sure all that matches. So Ryan Moore, yes, and email address is correct. So now that that's done, let's take a look at the user's profile. And we can't see the password to make sure that matches, of course. But the rest we can, so we can make sure the user is a subscriber. Yes, and we can check their assignments. So in this case, assigned to a number of courses. I think some of these were actually open. which might have or might cause some confusion there. And then the important thing here, especially, was what was set for the. I'm going to open it in a new tab just so we can compare with the defaults again. So if I go back to options, because it was blank, we were adding the user to Uncanny Owl. That's correct. Here we were adding to Leadership 101. Oh no, did I have something defined? Yeah, this one. So that is essentially how the import LearnDash users module works. There is a lot to it, but it does still make the process of uploading users and getting them into courses, into groups, especially in large batches, much easier than alternatives. So we do hope you find it helpful. Definitely a lot of work went into it. Take a look at the sample file and check out what's in the knowledge base on the Uncanny Owl website, and that should get you started with using the module. Thanks.